Before we get started, I want to get some warnings out there. This show is definitely not for children. It contains nudity, prostitution, sex scenes, graphic violence, and suicide attempts. If you're for any reason uncomfortable with that content, I'll have another warning before I start talking about those aspects in depth. The description has timestamps for when that is, so you can skip it if you wish. Or completely avoid this video. No shame. You do what you gotta do. It's often very hard to tell when you cross the line between a healthy amount of caution and concern into full-blown paranoia. At least it is for me. What's the appropriate reaction to hearing a mysterious noise in your home in the middle of the night? To brush it off and return to what you were doing? To do a quick check of the house? Maybe check the locks? To look out the windows to check outside? To start keeping a weapon nearby? To glance at the door to your room every once in a while? To maybe consider investing in an alarm or security cameras? When have you gone too far? And how do you ever really, truly know that you're safe? I'm Kalice, and I very much recommend Paranoia Agent. Paranoia Agent is something that is on the surface rather easy to explain. It's a show about unraveling a mystery with elements of horror. After a very strange OP that I still only kind of understand, the introductory scene is one of people in a large city, Musashino, Tokyo. It's mostly people commuting. There's a lot of loud, off-putting noise, and all the dialogue is about sources of a variety of stress, all while that noise grows more and more distracting. Alright, yeah, tone is officially set. I am officially on edge, so thanks for that. Good job, show. After this sequence, we see an old man writing some massive equation on the ground of a parking lot. He's interrupted when he looks up to see a woman on a bus. The bus pulls away, and we're given the title of the first episode. Enter Lil Slugger, or Enter Shonen Bat, depending on which language you're watching the show in. We now follow the woman who was on the bus for a bit, and she's the first named character in the show, Tsukiko Sagi. She's a character designer, seemingly for one of those companies that makes cute mascot characters and doesn't really seem to do much else. Fair enough, I guess. Her last design, a cute pink dog named Maromi, is incredibly stupidly popular. Basically, he's the Hello Kitty of this world. I mean, he is pretty cute, usually. Not that cute, but pretty cute. Tsukiko's boss wants her next character to be another sensation. She's under a lot of pressure and really doesn't seem to be responding well to it. Thanks, capitalism. On her walk home that night, she passes an old lady rummaging through trash. The encounter freaks her out, and also an encroaching darkness starts to close in on her. You have to wonder if this is literal darkness, a metaphorical representation of her fear, or something that only exists within the character's perception. You're probably going to be asking questions like this a lot throughout the series. So she starts to run, eventually tripping and spilling her belongings all over a parking lot. While gathering her stuff up, she tears the sleeve of her shirt, then she hears roller skates approaching, and a mysterious figure hits her with a bat. All in all, a pretty bad day. She did survive the attack, and at the hospital, she's questioned by detectives Keiichi Akari and Mitsuhiro Maniwa. These two are our main characters, kind of sort of along with Tsukiko, though the camera isn't afraid to completely leave them for entire episodes at a time. Detective Akari is an old-style detective, a bit jaded, but strongly believes in justice and the proper way of doing things, while Detective Manawa is more optimistic and open to more eclectic means to solving cases. A rather common trope for investigative stories, but their interactions are enjoyable, and the direction the narrative takes the two of them in is anything but generic. But you know, don't want to spoil the details on that. Tsukiko, with some difficulty due to her recent trauma, recounts that her attacker seemed to be an elementary school boy with a golden bat, golden skates, and a red baseball hat. Detective Akari thinks she's lying, while Detective Manawa believes her, and they start trying to chase the case, as the media becomes fascinated with the incident, making it a topic that pretty much everyone is aware of, and adding even more stress to Tsukiko's life. So that's the basic plot premise. Again, fairly standard investigative stuff with some dashes of horror, but the execution of the narrative is very far from standard. The character being focused on changes regularly, almost episode to episode. There are entire episodes that seem completely unrelated to the main narrative for most of their runtime, focusing on a character who is either entirely new or seem to have just had a bit part before, delving into how deeply fucked up either their situation in life is, or they are as people, or both, before in some way being connected to the greater plot. Many of the episodes feel like individual stories that are then connected to the meta-narrative of the investigation, usually by way of another attack by the mysterious Shonen Bat. Also, Shonen Bat translates directly to something like Bat Boy, which sounds like either a superhero or a cryptid, or maybe even a wrestler, but like a young wrestler to me. So I'm not surprised it was localized as Lil Slugger. I don't think Lil Slugger sounds great either though. So I'm going with Shonen Bat throughout this video because I think it sounds the best out of all the options. With the shifting perspectives, we come across the question of what is and isn't real. Not all of the characters are the most reliable narrators, and I had a lot of fun trying to figure out how much of what I was seeing was actually happening, and how much was characters being deceptive or outright delusional. Also, some of the characters that we focus on are absolutely terrible people, and other ones are just really, really unlucky. The episodes, or bits of episodes, that focus on the investigation find our detectives trying to puzzle out the reasons behind what seem like completely random attacks, and thus track down the assailant. With each new clue discovered, the attacks seem to make less and less sense, and we occasionally check in on the mental state of our very not okay character designer. Comparisons to Durarara immediately jump to my mind, though the content and presentation is much more horrifying, disturbing, and at times purposefully confusing. And the point isn't necessarily to tie together all of these disparate threads into one complex narrative web, but to tell individual stories of people affected in some way by Shonen Bat. Now, to peel back the curtain a bit here, the inherent problem with talking about a show like this in terms of a recommendation and not a deep dive analysis is that it's difficult for me to know exactly how much I should talk about. The more I say, the more you know about the experience going in, and in the case of Paranoia Agent, a lot of the suspense and mystery relies on you not knowing what the fuck is going on. The more you see and hear in this video, the more likely you are to pick up on puzzle pieces before the show would reveal them to you. But if I don't say enough, then you might not be tempted to check it out, which would make the bite of this video a bit toothless. So there are 2 episodes that have content that could definitely turn people away, but there are also 2 episodes that stay pretty far away from the main plot. I'm going to look at them a bit in depth here so you can have some more information both about the show and about the questionable content. If you'd rather avoid this information for spoiler reasons, or are uncomfortable with discussions about nudity, sex, and suicide, there are timestamps in the description that you can use to skip that part of the video. Episode 3 of the show focuses on a character named Harumi Chono. She has dissociative identity disorder, in layman's terms, a split personality. I genuinely don't feel at all qualified to judge whether or not this narrative features an accurate portrayal of DID, but as someone who suffers from mental health issues myself, primarily depression, I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, it's not the unfortunately common trope of portraying those with mental illnesses as monstrous. Heck, it even features her going and talking to a therapist about her problems, but it does ultimately use her mental health issue as a source for horror. I ultimately enjoy the narrative, but if it makes people uncomfortable, I definitely understand why. Harumi's other personality is called Maria, and she's a bit of a hedonist, concerned with living her life to the fullest whenever she has the chance. To that end, she's a prostitute. The anime does show some of her work. I don't think the scenes are too long, but there is nudity and some brief sex scenes. This brings up the question of Harumi's consent, as it is her body being involved, and how okay with this she is varies wildly throughout the episode. I'm genuinely not sure if this counts as a form of sexual assault, but I do know that it borders on that. It also borders on demonizing sex workers, as Maria is ostensibly the antagonist of this episode. It doesn't focus on her being evil because of her work, and the work itself is not portrayed particularly negatively, but it's just another piece of media in a very long list of fiction that propagates a negative connotation with sex work. I don't like that it does that. Sex workers of all types deserve respect, and this episode clearly doesn't help with that particular societal hang-up. These things did make it by far the worst episode of the series to me, but despite my concerns, I did still find it to be an overall enjoyable watch. Harumi and Maria leave each other messages on an answering machine to communicate with each other, and at the start of the episode, Harumi seems okay with, or at least neutral about, sharing her body with another personality, even with Maria's chosen profession. As the episode goes on, though, the two come into conflict. Harumi begins forming a romantic relationship, eventually being proposed to, and tries to hide and suppress Maria, while Maria attempts to sabotage Harumi's life in retaliation. The presentation of Maromi trying to hold her life together as her mental state and grip on reality degrade further and further makes for a horrifying watch. This episode, like many of the episodes of Paranoia Agent, is about watching someone's life go from seemingly stable, if a bit strange, to completely ruined, and watching how a person handles that, or really doesn't handle that. It's a type of horrifying that hits me close to home. I'm genuinely constantly worried about my life completely falling apart in every way that matters. Also, I personally find the idea of someone or something taking control of my body to commit acts that I never would to be a terrifying and narratively interesting concept. I just think that it can be handled in such a way where that conflict comes not from mental illness, but from a demon or parasite or something. A lot of shonen action anime play with this concept, actually. The next episode I'm going to talk about typifies how unpredictable and strange the show can be while still ultimately relying on a horrifying or disturbing concept. Episode 8 opens with an old man who goes by Fuyodachi and a young man who goes by Zebra with Maromi merch meeting up in person. It quickly becomes clear that they are friends from an online chat room, meeting for the first time, and they're planning to meet another friend, a woman who goes by the handle Kamome. It turns out this woman is actually a little girl. Fuyodachi immediately starts trying to nope out of the situation, while Zebra seems initially happy to meet her. I'm going to get this out of the way early and say that thankfully, neither of the men have a romantic interest in this little girl. That's not what this is about. It is not in any way, shape, or form an element of this. Most of the episode is presented in a very lighthearted, almost whimsical way, judging by the music and the way the characters move. It's designed to be disarming and off-putting. If you never know what to expect or are reeling from something that isn't directly horrifying, then the horror, be it more concrete or existential, hits harder. That's the idea anyway, and it was incredibly effective throughout the show as far as I'm concerned. After what I can only describe as some shenanigans, Fuyodachi and Zebra think they've escaped from Kamome, but she's actually tailing them from a distance. It's around now that the other shoe drops. It turns out that the reason these internet friends were meeting up is because they formed a suicide pact and were planning on killing themselves together. The tone of the episode continues to be lighthearted and fun despite this new information. This is one of the most extreme cases of intentional tonal dissonance I've ever come across, and I think it worked really disturbingly well. After a failed, attempt and a heart-to-heart with the strangest possible context, the guys agree to let Kamome come with, and the rest of the episode has the three of them going around trying to find a way to commit suicide that sits well with them, while Fuyodachi and Zebra try to set things up in such a way that they'll die while Kamome lives. The episode also subtly introduces the reasons that each of these characters wants to die, and makes a few connections to the larger narrative. As someone who's struggled with suicidal thoughts for a very long time now, I actually found this episode strangely wholesome, which is fucking weird to say, I know, but just, it reminded me a lot of how I would sometimes cope with my suicidal thoughts and attempts by making jokes about it. It's a habit that I've since distanced myself from for a variety of reasons, but the episode still really resonated with me in a way that no other piece of fiction has. I also really like how the episode ends, but I won't spoil that. It's my favorite episode of the show, but at the same time, I completely understand why people would be off-put by it. Not gonna do as deep of a delve on this one, but in episode 6, an underage girl, she's 17, discovers a camera in her room that's recording her presumably all the time. It's a rather brief scene, and there's more of a focus on her reaction to this information than going into much detail on what exactly the camera was recording. Anime tends to have a lot of problems with handling subject material like this. It's very often presented as comedic, and even when it's not played for laughs, perverse acts involving underage characters are often presented in a way seemingly meant to titillate the viewer, which is super fucking gross. That is not the case in Paranoia Agent. It's something that's meant to be gross and horrifying, and the presentation of it lines up with that, in my opinion. Though it is another thing that I'm sure some people are not comfortable with watching, or at the very least would want a warning about, so there you go. The studio behind Paranoia Agent is Madhouse, known for, well, a lot of very well animated shows, including, but very much not limited to, Death Note, One Punch Man Season 1, and Trigun. Most of the animation I found to be fine, though there are instances where it really becomes something phenomenal. Satoshi Kon directed this series. Apparently he's very well regarded, especially for horror. I'd heard his name before, but I'm not really familiar with any of his work aside from knowing that there was a bit of a controversy where people were claiming that the American film Black Swan was a bit of a ripoff of Kon's Perfect Blue. After how much I enjoyed Paranoia Agent, I'm definitely interested in checking out his other work, so keep an eye out for videos on some of those at some point in the future. Probably, maybe, don't hold your breath. Paranoia Agent came out way back in 2004, and if you're wondering, yes, I'm making this video now because of the recent Toonami run. As you can probably guess based on this video, I watched the sub version. I'm absolutely down to go dig up an older series to make a video on, but I honestly had no idea that the show even existed until I happened to check out what was happening on Toonami. Growing up, Toonami was one of the main things that got me into anime. I've got a soft spot for it, so for all of you other Toonami faithful out there, hi, thanks for watching this. Paranoia Agent is a show that defied my expectations in more ways than I can count, which, with how much anime I've consumed at this point, is something really special to me. Episode to episode, I genuinely didn't have any idea what was to come, and was fascinated to see what the show would throw at me next, both in terms of individual episode stories and the larger mystery. The show isn't concerned with sticking too closely to genre constraint. Many individual episodes contain content you normally wouldn't find in a horror/mystery series, but it always in some way loops back around to some form of terrifying. I'd say to give 3 episodes a look if you just want to see what the flavor is, or 7 if you want to see a very interesting thing that the main narrative does, being vague because spoilies. There's 13 episodes total, so it's a pretty quick watch as far as anime is concerned. Also, I usually skip next episode previews for fear of spoilers, but there's weird, mysterious, multi-meaning monologues that become important way later, so I'd recommend you actually watch those for this show. I really enjoyed Paranoia Agent, and I hold it up as an example of how unique anime series can be. As a fan of horror, it's rather difficult to find good horror narratives. The genre has a lot of garbage to wade through to find gems, and this is absolutely one of those gems. It's even rarer for a show to maintain a good horror narrative throughout. Even in instances where the plot doesn't completely fall apart, the genre focus usually shifts, typically to action. There's still a bit of horror there, but it's more of a dressing than anything else. Things like Parasite the Maxim and Tokyo Ghoul are great, but they aren't genuinely scary in the latter parts of their narratives, for the most part. Paranoia Agent is genuinely scary throughout, while also eventually providing satisfying answers to its core mystery. Despite a few possible hangups, I can't recommend it enough. This has been Kalice, thanks for watching. You can like the video, subscribe, or share this video around if you enjoyed it and want to. My Patreon exists, with rewards like access to my raw recording sessions and your name being written in the credits or read out depending on the tiers, so feel free to go look at that. Speaking of, big thanks to all of my current patrons like Ash. Keep loving what you love, and I'll see you next time with something else.